Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Today we're having a discussion on the hard problem of consciousness and physicalism. Our guests today are Dr. David Papineau and Akhandadi. I'll start out by getting our guests to quickly introduce themselves. David, can we start with you? Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm very pleased to be here. So I'm David Papineau. I'm Professor of Philosophy at King's College London, where I've been for 30 years, and I work on metaphysics, philosophy of mind, philosophy of science. I have a bit of a maths background. I'm interested in many areas of philosophy.
And Akhandadi, could you please give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Okay, thank you, Arjun. Again, thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks for coming on.
My name is Akhandadi. My background is the study of Vedanta subjects, along with some of the other schools of Indian thought, Sankhya and Yoga. That's been my training since my early adult, when I joined an ashram, lived there for 20 years, and continued the study and practice of the meditation and certain aspects of yoga over the years. But same interest as David, the metaphysics of mind, of consciousness, and the nature of reality in this world.
Cool. And then I'll get you to each briefly sketch out your worldview so the audience can understand where you're each coming from. So, Dr. Papineau, could you please... I understand you're a physicalist, but you don't like the term naturalism. I personally think the word naturalism is also quite vague, and in some contexts we should replace it with the word unconscious processes and so on.
Well, that's a interesting challenge. I mean, I don't especially object to the word naturalism. I don't mind being described as a naturalist, but I do think it's pretty vague. I know because I wrote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on naturalism, and I spent some months trying to figure out how to define naturalism, and I realized this was just a mug's game. Different people understand it differently, and there's no right or wrong about it. So I don't think it's a very useful term in philosophical discussion. Materialism, physicalism, which I use pretty much interchangeably, that's a much more definite position, and that's the view I endorse, and it's the view that there's nothing in spatio-temporal reality, in concrete reality, that's not physical. Now, I mean, immediate challenge raised me. I think, and we might talk about this in a bit, I think this view is strongly supported by modern science, and it's difficult to accept the findings of modern science and resist this view. I mean, I think that's what we'll talk about a lot, but the first question that arises if you assume this view is, does that mean that certain things that we hold dear have to go? Does it mean, do I think there are no minds, there's no consciousness? Do I think that there's no meaning or values? And part of the challenge for physicalists is to show how most of those things, or the parts of those things worth caring about, as Daniel Dennett puts it, can be preserved, are still there, even within the materialist worldview. So I think that the materialist worldview doesn't lead to the elimination of values. It doesn't lead to the elimination of the idea that there are minds that represent the world outside them. And it doesn't lead to the elimination of the thing we'll concentrate on today, the elimination of consciousness. So that's my position.
I've had people on the internet tell me that if God existed, then God would be natural.
Let me get it. Well, it does lead to the elimination of non-material things. So if you think of God as some kind of non-material being that's able to interact with what's in space and time, then I think physicalism does eliminate that. It would arguably eliminate many conceptions of souls as things that survive death, perhaps can be reincarnated in different bodies. Entities like that do indeed get eliminated by physicalism. But as I said, I mean, an awful lot of the things that I find important and you might worry get eliminated by physicalism, I say they don't. But certainly supernatural beings, let's put it simply like that, they do get eliminated. Yeah.
Yeah, some people, they say if God existed, he'd be natural, because they define naturalism as things that exist, which I think evacuates the word of all its meaning.
But Arjun, that's precisely why I wanted to avoid the term natural. I think the debate goes much better if you stick to material or physical. If somebody comes along and says, I think God exists because God's a material being, well, then I'd like to know a bit more about exactly how that works, and maybe I wouldn't be against that. So, yeah.
All right.
But somebody who says God exists and is not material, that I take to be inconsistent with my view, and I take my view to be supported by modern science. So I think that's what we'll have to look at.
So, Akhandadi Das, could you please give us your worldview in a nutshell?
I shall do my best. My interest is Vedanta philosophy, and seeing the insights from that can be applied to our modern questions raised by philosophy and modern science. I'd like to clarify that I'm a kind of Vedanta realist. Now, I know realism has its own kind of connotations in Western philosophy, but I'm a realist in that I believe there is a real external world that we are involved with, that our mental states are real, and that consciousness is real. So I'm not one of the idealist type of Vedantists, which is often the type that has probably got more airtime, if you like, within Western philosophy. The other thing is that I would not consider myself a dualist. Now, I know I'm going to be suggesting certain things that will sound very dualistic, and I know, David, the way you consider that trying to categorize mental states as anything other than the physical would be a dualist position. So, although I will be offering something that probably sounds a bit like property dualism, I do not wish to be categorized by the same issues or questions that maybe is generally part of that kind of concept. And I don't regard myself as a dualist, because ultimately I believe there is a single ontology. And that this is the Vedanta picture, that whatever there is in reality, whatever there is real, can ultimately be brought back to its substrate. And that substrate defines the properties of all the constituent elements of reality, whether that be the physical realm, and we're making very big distinctions here, the mental realm, or even the conscious realm. And the one thing that Vedanta, the yoga texts, and Sankhya all kind of offer, which I think is a little different to the Western analysis of philosophy of mind, is that instead of thinking of just mental states and physical, Vedanta, Sankhya, etc., consider that there really are three different functions at work here. There's the physical functions and properties that we analyze in the world. There are mental states, and they've got their own functions and properties. And consciousness as the ability to experience those states is a different property. So it separates mind from consciousness, in simple terms.
And if people want to know more, they can watch the Atma Paradigm series on YouTube, on your YouTube channel, where you gave something like 40 lectures. So, David, would you like to give us an argument for physicalism, and then we can have some back and forth?
Good. So, I'm curious about what Akhandadi thinks and why he's not a dualist. I mean, my limited acquaintance with his thinking makes me feel he is. But perhaps the way to proceed is for me to elaborate the standard argument against dualism, and then we can see whether Akhandadi wants to disagree with it or not. So let's suppose we have a reasonable idea of what the physical, the material realm is. It's constituted by the kinds of things studied by science and the physical sciences. So there's subatomic particles, atoms, matter is made of those kind of components. Maybe it's a bit different at high energies, but we're talking about the kinds of things that are grounded, constituted by the subject matter of the physical sciences. And now there's a question about whether there's anything else in spatio-temporal reality. I qualify by saying spatio-temporal reality because there's another issue about whether do we want to believe perhaps in numbers, in sets, various other kinds of abstract objects, which if you do believe in them, they're outside spatio-temporal reality. I want to put that to one side. I mean, if anybody wants to, we can come back to it. But I say that are there things in spatio-temporal reality that are other than physical? And many people are inclined to think, yes, minds are in spatio-temporal reality. They are located in our heads or in that region. They affect our bodies. They're part of the spatio-temporal world. But surely they themselves aren't physical. It's a natural thought, and it's modern expression most clearly in Descartes. There's the physical brain, and then intuitively, in addition to the brain, there's the conscious world of feelings and thoughts and emotions and so on. And intuitively, it certainly strikes us, and I agree about this, that that's something extra to what's going on in the brain. Okay, you might think that it's extra, but still very much tightly controlled by the brain. Many people think that, but that would still be a dualist view. The dualist view is just that in addition to what's in the brain, there are these extra conscious feelings and emotions and so on. What's the argument against that intuitive view? Well, it's pretty simple. It's that surely we want to think that these conscious feelings, emotions, pains, visual experiences, conscious decisions affect what we do. They make a difference to our actions. I mean, we feel something, we pull our hand out the fire, we think consciously about what to do, we decide to make a trip across the country. There are cases where conscious events influence physical goings on. Okay, but modern science, and this very much is a matter of modern science, I'd say the last 150 years, has given us strong evidence that all physical results are produced by physical causes. So if you can imagine a scientist, a physiologist thinking about, well, why did my arms move like that? Why did I pull my hand out of the fire? Why did I start walking across the country? They'd say, well, that's because electrochemical messages came down from your brain to your arm. And why did that happen in your brain? Well, that's because there was other electrochemical activity beforehand, and so on. And the scientists will expect to be able to trace out this chain of causation entirely within the physical realm, without moving outside it. So that seems to leave no room for a separate conscious realm to make a difference to what goes on in the physical world. So put it the other way around, I think it's pretty obvious that my thoughts and decisions and feelings and so on do make a difference to what I do. Given that, and given that all physical events, including my behavior, are due to physical causes, you've got to conclude that the conscious thinking, the conscious feelings, must themselves be part of what's going on in your brain. You have to identify the conscious feelings, the conscious decisions with brain processes in order to account for the fact that they affect your behavior. You've got to push the conscious mind, as it were, down into the brain in order to respect the thought that your conscious decisions make a difference to your behavior. And so that's the view I end up with about consciousness. Consciousness is nothing different from brain and perhaps some surrounding bodily processes. It's just physical events going on in your brain. Now, I agree this is counterintuitive. As I said, the natural thought is there's the brain processes, and in addition, there's the feelings. But I think the argument I've just given you shows that there's something wrong with that view. What you need to conclude is that the feelings are nothing different from certain brain processes going on. When I see something red, that just is certain oscillations in V4 in my visual cortex. And I agree that this is a kind of slightly strange view, but I don't think it's kind of incomprehensible. The view is that's what it's like for you when you have a brain like that. And I might put you, well, what would you have expected to be like to have a brain like that, to be a being with a brain like that? Would you expect it to be nothing? Why? In fact, it turns out that when you have a brain like that, you have a certain way of being for yourself. For you, it's like it is when you see something red, but that's just a matter of how it is to have a brain that's operating in a certain way. So, as I say, it seems to me that the findings of modern science, and we could talk a bit more about exactly how they emerged, don't leave room for any position other than that the conscious mind just is the physical brain. And just to comment on the hard problem of consciousness, it's not quite clear what the hard problem is. If the hard problem is to understand how the conscious realm fits into the spatio-temporal realm, I take it that what I've just said is a solution to the hard problem. But sometimes the hard problem is set up so as to presuppose that the simple physics view I've just outlined is not acceptable. Sometimes it's set up. How is it that conscious experiences arises from brain processes? And if you put the problem like that, I will resist the problem. I say the idea that conscious experiences arising from brain processes presupposes that there's something extra. And you shouldn't put it like that. The truth is that conscious experiences are brain processes. And once you accept that that's what they are, there's no further question about how do the brain processes generate this extra thing. The position I'm defending is that there just isn't any extra thing. So there's no hard problem in that sense. Does that is that enough of an argument? I'm not saying you have to accept the argument, but you can see what the argument is.
Well, thank you, David. I think you've given us a few points that we'll probably have to try and unpack. Let's start with where we might agree that we have the intuition that I am a subjective experiencer. I am an entity that seems to be having experiences of this world. And I think you kind of agree that's the intuition, but you're saying we should question that intuition because...
That intuition I don't question in the slightest. That you exist, that you're an experiencer, you have experiences of the world. Of course, I agree about that.
But you think that it is intuitively wrong then to think that means I must be something different from the... Right.
So it's okay. Intuition that involves something non-physical.
That starts to involve the dualism. Now, of course, you've talked about the hard problem and you've framed it in one way, but I think that the issue that plagues the discussion on consciousness, where other philosophers do see that there is an issue to be attended to, and that is the issue of qualia, that there seems to be a difference of format of information in the brain and in the mental state. And we cannot seem to link the two of them directly. There is obviously a very close correlation between mind and brain, you know. But it is not direct. It is not in the same format. And to use this kind of simple analogy, it's almost like the brain works on a kind of digital format, and the mind in a certain analog. Or you could suggest that the difference is, and this is simply an analogy, if I describe to you a scene in words, I can give you all the information in the format of words. But if someone else then receives that information and paints a picture with it, they have presented the information in a way that is different to the words. Now, you can say they certainly seem to relate, but the formatting of words is not the same as the formatting of paint on a painting. And that seems to be the difficulty that we have in modern science, in modern neuroscience, that we have investigated the brain rather thoroughly. There's much more to know. We haven't reached the end yet, but having studied it rather thoroughly, we see the type of physical interactions that are happening within the brain, and they don't help us give any idea why I am experiencing that type of digitalized electrical data in the format that I am, in the format with qualities, such as I am observing the world as a picture. That's how I see, I experience the world as a picture. I am seeing colors, movements, and forms around me. Now, we agree that there's an external world that will have forms and movement and things. But when the light from that comes into our eyes, it's then simply turned into electrical signals. The picture, in one sense, has gone. And when that goes to the various processing parts within the brain, there is some kind of neural representation of that data, but it is not in the format by which I experience it. Therefore, there does seem to be a clear duality in your terms between the mental qualities and properties of qualia and what we experience and what the brain can do. And I think if we're going to say that they are one and the same thing, we have to do more than just say, well, that's just wrong intuition. We're going to have to show we can bridge the gap between what the physics says can be produced in terms of properties and what we experience in terms of our mental states. And I think that becomes the onus on physicalism. If you're going to kind of say we should dispense with the natural intuition of seeing that our mental states seem to have some intrinsically property difference to the physical states of the brain. Now,
can I just chip in?
Yeah, let's just deal with that, and then we'll move on to the issue that you brought up on interaction. But
right, but let me just get clear about the points of disagreement between us. So let's just focus on, say, the experience of seeing something red. I just look at a piece of paper, it's red. I have a experience of a certain sort. And I said, by way of illustration, that my having this experience is just a matter of a certain oscillation in V4, fourth level of my visual cortex. And I want to say the same thing, and I gave you an argument about why one really can't avoid this conclusion. And it seems to me you're just saying, I don't agree about that. Now, I mean, you had a bit more that it doesn't really make sense that they should be the same thing, but in a different format. But that just sounds to me that you're denying what I'm asserting. I'm saying that there's a certain oscillation in V4. If you're a being who has that brain doing that thing, then it's like it is for you. I say they're just the same thing. And no, but you're denying that they are. I don't quite see what the argument is. You're just saying that they're not the same thing.
No, I mean, we don't want to get into the thing where you're saying that they are the same and I'm saying that they're not. I'm trying to point out a fairly standard view amongst philosophers that mental states seem to have troublesome qualities that we cannot reconcile with those kind of brain activity things that you are saying is that experience, because it's very clear that we are beings that have empiric experiences, and the most empiric experiences we have are of the sense of our own existence, and the next level are the experiences that I have of these mental states. Now, these mental states do have properties, and the properties are very hard to reconcile with just saying they are the brain states.
Okay, that's good. So, look, we can agree, and I've granted that the dualist thought is a natural thought. We're kind of brought up with it. It's part of religion. Maybe there's deeper reasons why it comes naturally to us. So I'm not denying it's an intuitive thought. But what I'm challenging you to produce is an argument that backs up this intuition that the two things must be different. Now, indeed, if you can force me to accept that the mental processes, the experiences, have some properties that the physical states don't have, well, then that would establish the point. But maybe we need to look at that a bit more. I mean, you said that the physical states have a certain format, and the brain states have a different format, and maybe you want to go into that a bit more detail. The physical states have a different format, the mental states have another format, but it's not clear to me why I need to accept that. The physical state is a certain kind of oscillation. The experience is a certain modification of my mind. I say they're the same thing. They're the same thing. Why do I have to concede that they're different?
Yeah. First of all, I wouldn't suggest that this kind of intuition that I am observing something different within my mind is related to culture, religion, or anything else. I would say that's the natural view of human beings, to see that somehow or other, as conscious beings, we are experiencing the world in a particular way. And you mentioned the color red, but let's expand just that visual analogy again. I see the world as a picture. I am actually experiencing a picture in front of me. And the brain can say it tries to represent pictures, but something is going to have to be needed to turn that representation in terms of the physical components and activities of neural activity into something that represents the picture that I see. And I really don't think that it's satisfactory, David, to say that it just is. I'm showing that there is a difference and there's a question to be answered. So I think I am in some way justifying that there is something to be dealt with. And we know that many philosophers, whether it's David Chalmers, even John Searle, explains that the thing we need to explain about consciousness is unified, qualitative subjectivity. And I think that
right. So I grant
you're taking an approach, which I'm not saying is automatically wrong, but I'm saying that if you are going to take that approach, you are taking an approach which really is acting against many, many modern philosophers. And
I don't actually want to argue from authority, but I mean, it's true. Look, there's what I give you is the natural thought, the historical thought. Perhaps it goes deeper, that the mind and the brain are separate. I grant that there's this thought around. I say it's a bad thought. I mean, it's a natural thought that the sun goes round the earth. It's a natural thought that matter is solid through and through with no spaces between atoms. I mean, these are natural thoughts, but they're just mistaken. And I say this natural thought is similarly mistaken. Some philosophers, I mean, few philosophers just rest with the intuition. They produce arguments. And I mean, if we're arguing from authority, I'd say a majority of contemporary philosophers share my view, but a significant minority are on the other side. But the minority do produce arguments. Now, you had an argument there that conscious experience of the world. I'm in fact looking out of my window at a flowering cherry tree. It's very beautiful. So every time you say that, I'm thinking of this case. And you said it involves a picture. And I must say I'd be hesitant about following that line of thought if I were you. Pictures, we know what pictures are. Pictures are kind of, there's one on my wall here. It's a piece of paper with colors on. And it's not clear to me that you really want to say that when I have a sensory experience, I have one of those in my head or in my mind. I mean, the truth is just this, that what it's like for me to look at the cherry tree is rather what it's like for me to look at a picture of a cherry tree. But that's not telling us something about conscious experience. It's telling us something about pictures. Pictures are designed to produce just the experience that cherry trees produce. Pictures of cherry trees are designed to do that. So it's not clear that when I'm looking at a cherry tree, there's any picture involved. I wouldn't want to go there if I were you.
I think we will go here, because I think that you are leaving out the physical processes that happen when we interact with the external world and what aspect of the external world we are dealing with. Yes, there is a real, and I've got a very young cherry tree out here, which is not yet in blossom, so not as pretty as yours, but I have other trees where light is bouncing off them coming in the window.
Right.
So that's my experience, is that light is going into my eye. It is being translated into electrical activity. We then have to accept that the brain doesn't have the format of forms, of colors and things that are there in the outside world. It now simply has digital representation of all of that. Is that fair enough?
That's fine. But I don't think do you really think that you really think
that is not as a computer looking at the digital representation? My experience of that is that somehow it is being manifest to my conscious awareness as visual imagery. Now, that is something that is of interest. How has that process occurred within the brain?
I don't think there's anything more to the visual imagery than the brain processes. You think there's something more, but you're in the problem now of saying, well, how's it going to work? You've got this extra thing, and let's just take the shape of the tree, the geometrical shape of the tree. Do you think this extra thing, the experience, is itself got a shape in the same sense that a tree has a shape, that the experience has physical properties of being square or round or cylindrical? The experience is like that. Is that what you're thinking? The experience has geometrical properties, that we could measure the experience, we could decide whether that was a right angle in the experience, how long the experience is, and so on.
When we have the experience, the visual experience, and somehow or other, it kind of looks like you think you are your eyes. You think you are actually seeing the external world when you are conscious. But actually, what is happening is that consciousness is acting on the information of the brain. I think now that we have neuroscience, the distinction has become even more acute.
Akhandadi, I've just written, in fact, I don't think what you think. I've just written a book running against nearly all philosophers saying that conscious experience does not give me a window onto the external physical world of that kind, that it's all inside the head, that we need to distinguish sharply between the nature and the properties that experience, i.e. brain processes, have, and the properties that trees have. But I think we're getting...
You're quite right. The properties that brain have are different from the properties of the external world. But the interesting thing is the properties that I experience consciously have qualities that are different from the brain. So that's why we kind of have to cover that area.
Well, it sounds to me like you're committed to the thought that the brain doesn't have the same properties as the tree, but the experience does have the same properties as the tree, of whiteness and cylindricality and so on. And I'm just very uneasy about the idea that experiences have properties that worldly physical objects have. That seems to me you've ended up in a bit of a confusion. But can I say, we can talk about for a long time.
I wouldn't accept the confusion.
I'm curious to hear what you think about the argument that, in effect, if you do have a conscious mind that's separate from the physical world, it's going to end up being inefficacious, epiphenomenal, makes no difference to what goes on in the physical world. That's in effect the argument I gave, why it's just so uncomfortable to end up with any kind of dualist position. And I wanted to know how you deal with that discomfort.
Okay, thank you. And that's an important one to move on to. So, okay, we may disagree in terms of the properties of our experience and properties of mental states and the brain. Okay, so we've clarified distinction there. Yes, I think that your main argument against what you see as a dualist position is the interaction issue. But we know that mind and brain do interact, as you say. You know, we both agree that there is interaction happening. Your point is that if it is happening, well, physical causes produce physical effects, therefore mental must be physical, right?
Exactly.
And my view is that things of different properties can interact, but rather than thinking that they're reacting head on, they always react at what is the substratum. That's that physical or metaphysical substratum which produces the properties of each. Give you a simple example: acids and alkalis. They have different properties, right? Mm-hmm. So that's dualism, I suppose. In chemistry terms, that's a sort of dualism. But we know that the properties of each of them are reconciled when we get down to the molecular ions and when we get down to the atoms. We can actually reconcile the properties of both to their substrate, their chemical or physical substrate. Similarly, the Vedanta explains that if you simply think, well, can mind as some stuff and matter as some other stuff interact in some way, you're kind of missing the point the way nature does interact. It doesn't interact on the macro level, it interacts at the substrate level. And therefore, what we need to do is dig a little deeper into what matter is, dig a little deeper into the properties of mind, and see what is the substrate from which both emerge. And the same with consciousness. There is a unifying substrate, which is why I say I'm not a dualist. In one sense, I believe in a singular ontology. But we need to get down to the substrate, and that's where we will start to see interaction. Now, you said that science doesn't, has always shown that physical effects have physical causes. I'm not sure that's entirely correct. And certainly, and I know you've written on the issues of kind of quantum mechanics, but when we start to get down to a certain level, we are dealing with matter very much in a Vedantic way, as energy and information, as packets of information, manifesting properties as matter. And when we get down to a certain level, actually we are able to show that there are certain situations, certain physical effects that occur that do not have any prior past physical causes, and that there is ample scope for considering what other interactions may be happening at that substrate level that can produce what may appear to be a chain of physical causes, but which were initiated not necessarily by physical causes.
I'm curious. Perhaps you could fill that out a bit, because I'm hearing two suggestions of two lines of thought that are familiar to me, and I'm wondering which one you want to develop. The idea that we want to get down to a deeper level where we will be able to see how the non-physical mind and the physical realm engage with each other sounds to me a bit like the position that's been developed in the philosophy of mind by a number of philosophers concerned with consciousness and the so-called hog problem. The Russellian monists sometimes developed into a panpsychist position, which is the idea that somehow behind the framework of interacting processes that science describes, as it were, from the outside, underneath there's some kind of substance, material that's conscious, and on this picture you might get the whole of reality, including trees and rivers and so on. At the bottom, there's a underlying substrate that is conscious or proto-conscious, and that's why the view is sometimes developed as panpsychism. That's an interesting view. I think it's unnecessary. It's mismotivated, but it's interesting that this view doesn't really think that this substrate makes a significant difference to how things unfold, what happens. They kind of defend this view as finding a place for a slightly separate consciousness in a way that respects the causal closure of the physical, respects the idea that nothing is going to happen that isn't predicted by physical science. So it's not clear that line of thought is enough for you. Then you had another thought, which is that quantum mechanics is indeterministic and so leaves room for a separate non-physical mind to, as it were, come in and make a difference to how the physical world unfolds. But I think that's not, quantum mechanics isn't as much help to your position as you might think, because while quantum mechanics is on the face of things indeterministic, that in a certain situation one thing might happen, another thing might happen, nothing decides that it's going to happen, it's just a matter of chance. Quantum mechanics also says it's just a matter of chance, and quantum mechanics is pretty insistent about that. And the idea that some other thing comes in from the outside of the physical realm and decides which thing is going to happen, that makes it not a matter of chance. And indeed, if that happened a lot, it would falsify the predictions of quantum mechanics, which says when we observe this kind of situation, we're going to get half spin up and half spin down, and nothing else makes a difference to that. So I don't think quantum mechanics really leaves room for a non-physical entity to come in and make a difference to how the physical world unfolds. And as I said, neither does the kind of Russellian monism, panpsychism, have that consequence either. So if you wanted your separate mind to make a difference to how the physical world unfolds, it's not clear to me either of those lines of thought are going to help you.
My point is that I'm not going to defend Russellian monism or panpsychism, and we'll come back to the quantum physics in a minute. My point is that when we see different properties manifest in reality, that in Vedanta terms will be because they there's a unifying substrate that is the source of those properties, and you can track those properties back to that source. And it will be at that area that there is likely to be the interaction between them. So philosophically, I certainly take it that there is opportunity for there to be interaction between consciousness, mind, and the physical stuff in a way that doesn't interfere with the physical causal closure or conservation of energy or things like that. It can be done. And there are experiments which demonstrate that. The quantum mechanics doesn't necessarily say that everything is chance. What it says is that it cannot identify any prior physical conditions or causation to the outcomes. Now, it certainly says these can be modeled by the Schrödinger equation in probability terms, but probabilities are not set up from first principles. You actually have to understand the full setup of that particular experiment. You see the result, you can then create your set of probabilities. Well, right? But the probabilities, no, David, I was patient to let you finish, but the probabilities, are not absolute. This is what we have observed as our experience of what is happening. But can those events be actually moderated and changed? And you'll be aware of the work done at Princeton Engineering Department, where they ran a program over 27 years under the Dean of Engineering, Robert John, where they actually analyzed this. And they found that they were able to show through something like 800,000 trials involving subjects and quantum devices that actually mental states and intentional states could affect the outcome of quantum activity in a way that seemed to change the probability, or so the normal probability. So there does seem to be certain evidence, and therefore I don't think that you can actually discount the potential. First of all, I don't think you've got an answer to the nature of mental states and qualitatively, and I don't think you can dismiss it by saying that modern science shows that there is no effect that hasn't got its source in the physical, and that there is no possibility with a link to mental properties which might be different properties to the physical. I think we can establish all of that. I think we can work within your concerns and we could be able to satisfy them.
Look, this is very good. I think we're very much thinking along the same lines here. So let me just put your thought in somewhat more concrete terms, and in a way that will I hope, I intend to make it more clear what you're saying, and thereby make it more implausible. But I suspect that we aren't actually going to disagree. Let me try. So I'm curious about how exactly it's going to work. So we want, at some point, my conscious mind to make a difference to what happens in the physical world, to my behavior, where it wouldn't happen otherwise. And so we're thinking about, look, here's all these brain processes, this physiology, electrochemical messages, and I'm saying, look, at the physical level, that's sufficient unto itself. It's the way it's going to evolve is fully fixed insofar as it's fixed and not just a chancy matter by prior physical processes. And you're saying, no, sometimes in the brain we'll find a setup, and now physics leaves it open exactly what's going to happen because it's a chancy quantum mechanical setup. So the quantum mechanics says, let's suppose that 50% of the time it goes one way, 50% of the time this molecular bond breaks, 50% of the time it doesn't. No, we might want to say about exactly what probability means, but let's just take it that's that's what quantum mechanics says. And now the thought is, well, maybe in that kind of context, sometimes I decide to cross the road, and sometimes I don't. And then when I decide to cross the road, the molecular bond breaks, and when I don't decide to cross the road, it doesn't. So here's a category of cases, the category of cases where I decide to cross the road, where in fact it's not 50% anymore. It's 100%, let's suppose, that the bond breaks. But I say, if that's the case, quantum mechanics said this is the kind of situation where 50% of the time the bond breaks and 50% it doesn't. And you're saying, no, quantum mechanics is wrong here, because it's just not the case that in this situation you always get 50-50. If in addition there's a conscious mind trying to break the bond, as it were, then we'll get the bond breaking more than 50%. And I say that seems to me inconsistent with modern physics. I mean, modern physics says the physical situation, it will happen 50-50.
No, I think you're under misunderstanding of the probabilities as if they were inviolable laws, when actually they are experimental results. And there is certainly plenty of scope. If you talk to physicists, you'll see that there's plenty of scope that it is not this inviolable law as you are presenting it. So that's probably worth looking into. But let's just go back to, because we've only got a few minutes left. And at the beginning, you said we won't be losing anything by your picture of consciousness, the brain, etc. But what about free will? Because you are suggesting that mental states and physical states are the same thing, and therefore fully predicated on the physical processes within the brain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Therefore, they have prior physical causes. Therefore, surely all mental activity, as well as all physical activity, is absolutely deterministic.
Well, I mean,
under your picture.
May as well. Quantum mechanics makes it perhaps not fully deterministic. That depends on.
No. Yeah, but okay, wait a minute. You may say it's not fully deterministic, but it's not under mental control.
No, I agree. I agree.
You would be saying that quantum stuff is still a physical thing. It may be probabilistic, and that's probabilistic determinism. So you've still no scope using quantum mechanics for free will.
Right. No, I agree. Free will is an issue. I don't think especially an issue pushed on us by physicalism, as our philosophical tradition knows. I mean, many people have a problem with free will just on the basis of determinism or divine foreknowledge. There's all kinds of ways of raising the problem of free will. I think it's a bit unfair to pin the problem on physicalism.
I'm not pinning it on physicalism. I'm saying that I'm asking, what is your position?
No, fine.
It looks to me that you cannot provide us with something that we do value, such as our sense of free will. That does not seem to be available in your model.
No, of course, and of course, I'm a compatibilist about free will. I think all the free will, Daniel demonstrated here, all the free will worth wanting is preserved within physicalism. So I think acting freely.
Sorry. There was a little bit of sound there. Could you repeat that statement?
I'm a compatibilist about free will. I think that what free will requires is not that my actions be undetermined, just the opposite. It's that my actions flow from my reasons, my beliefs, my desires, my aims, my character. That's what makes me be acting freely. If I'm somehow constrained by hypnotism or chains or something from doing something, then I'm not free. And so I think the contrast between free action and not free action isn't between determined and undetermined, but between action that flows from my character and decisions and action that doesn't. And so I'm perfectly happy to say that physicalism is compatible with free will.
I didn't recognize the free will that you were saying there, because you're saying it's flowing from beliefs and other things. Are those different from the physical processes of the brain, or are they the same? If they're the same as the physical processes, then they are of no relevance in the free will issue. If they are different, then you've brought in the dualist position.
That's not fair. I said that. Why do you say they have no relevance? I've just said that they're of the central relevance. You're just denying what I said. I said that I act freely if I act on the basis of my decisions, if my decisions influence my behavior. It doesn't matter if my decisions are determined, provided that they flow from my judgment, character, and so on. But when I say all these things, I mean the physical processes in the brain that those things are. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but you are very happy to use language which invokes the kind of dualist thing, as if these judgments and decisions that you are making are something other than that which is already which is being programmed by an ongoing sequence of physical cause and effect.
I couldn't have made it clearer from the start that when I talk about mind, I'm just talking about physical processes in the brain. I'm not an eliminativist about mind. I think that minds just are complicated brain processes.
So they are a chain of physical cause and effect.
Yeah.
And that whatever thought you have will be part of the cause and effect chain. Whatever decision you make is part of that cause and effect chain. That does not seem to allow for free will as others intuitively would like to accept.
So I think free will, the contrast between free and unfree actions, is the contrast between actions that are under my control, that stem from my decisions, and actions where I'm constrained in some way. That's what I take the contrast to be free will, between free and unfree to be. And I think that's preserved within physicalism. Okay, I'll grant you that some people intuitively think that free will involves something more, just as some people intuitively think that the consciousness involves something more than the brain. I think that if they think of free will in that way, then I'm not giving them that kind of free will. But I don't think there's any virtue of thinking of free will in that way. It's a bad way to think about free will. A better way to think about free will is to think about it in a way that's compatible with the knowledge of the world we get from modern science, because we do want to distinguish between free and unfree actions. And it would be a terrible thing if our knowledge of science showed us that there was no distinction. And there is a distinction between free and unfree actions. So you want a distinction that's compatible with modern science.
No, and the distinction you made between what you consider to be your actions and those foisted upon you seems to be irrelevant and invalid within your model. Because if we as organisms, with our senses, with our brains, are interacting with the world, then there are physical inputs on us, which are producing the physical kind of activities within our brain, and therefore the decisions and behaviors and everything else. It's all part of one system. It's all part of one determined system. I don't think you can avoid that in your picture. You cannot separate the organism as being causally different from the environment in your model. We're all part of the one system. And therefore, there is no free will in real terms. It is simply, this progression of the universe, kind of its chain of cause and effect.
Well, since the universe is a chain of cause and effect, it seems to me that your view denies that there's any free will. I think there's free will. It seems to me that given your view of free will and given the knowledge of the world we have, there's no free will. It seems to me you're the person who's in danger of eliminating free will, not me.
Not at all, because I've taken the position that there is not just the physical chain, but the physical chain of cause and effect can be influenced by the mental chain of cause and effect. There's no overdetermination, but there is an interaction there. And therefore, the world is not just simply the physical stuff doing its own thing, but there is this, if you like, interplay between consciousness, mental states, and the physical. Now, there's a complete kind of consistent metaphysical model that can be used for that. And it is a little different to the, if you like, the Western or European kind of philosophy of mind. But I think it's something that's worth exploring. And I think that your concerns and your challenges can be resolved within that model.
Okay.
But a little bit, we perhaps are running close to our...
We need to wrap up.
All right.
I've got 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, look, this has been fun, and I think both of our views have been laid out pretty clearly. So that's nicely worked out.
We've clarified the disagreement. I wonder if we could be clear if we're both using the word free will in the same sense. So perhaps, David, maybe you mean free will in the sense of internally caused rather than that's how I understand compatibilism. It's compatibilism for free will is useful because it gives you criteria you can use to figure out if somebody should be punished for their actions or not. Whereas the free will that a theist thinks about normally is more that my thoughts and desires are caused by me rather than by a physical process which is behind me or underneath me that I'm not aware of, that's actually just driving my actions without me having a say in it.
Well, I mean, and the theist thinks that me involves something more than the physical processes. I wouldn't accept that. I don't think it's caused by me. I think it is caused by me, but I think me is an internal physical thing. So no, I really
you cannot separate the internal from the external within the model of physicalism. Therefore, it is one system. Therefore, compatibilism fails.
Look, I think Arjuna was helpful. I'll grant you that we're thinking of free will in somewhat different ways. I'm thinking of free will in a way that is compatible with entirely physical world. You're thinking of free will in a way that requires something more than is present in the purely physical world. So you don't think that I'm giving us real free will, but I think that since the world is physical, your notion of free will eliminates any free will. So it seems to me we've got a kind of two-edged sword here. Maybe. Look, Arjuna was helping clarifying this. Look, I don't think we're going to end up with an agreement here, but I think we can agree that we've got clear about where we both stand and where the differences are.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, David. It's been really pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure.
That was a lot of fun and illuminating for me. So thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
We've got a few questions. I'm wondering if Akhandadi, if you'd be willing to stick around a little longer, and you could take the questions from one of the YouTubers who's commenting, and we can let David Papineau go.
Okay, that's fine. So shall I say goodbye to everybody?
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We'll hope to have you on again sometime soon. It's great discussion.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to talk to you, Akhandadi, and maybe we will try something else again.
Paths cross again. All the best, David.
Okay, all the best to both of you. Bye. Bye.
All right. I'll have to tidy up the stream layout because I haven't set it up for us too. But yeah, Digital Gnosis had a few questions. See if I haven't got the comment box here. Hang on. YouTube comment box. There we go. Oh, is that the one? Oh, wait, I got to go here. That's from another stream. Yeah, Digital Gnosis is asking, why does the complexity of conscious behavior expression always seems to correlate with neural architecture complexity? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It's a good question. Thank you. Your key word there, and it's the correct word, is correlate. The mental states that we experience definitely correlate very closely with brain activity. That's because at the moment we are consciousness embodied within a biological organism. We rely on our senses. The senses feed the brain. The brain is processing that information. But as I was trying to explain to David, that the information that's there in the brain needs to be reformatted into a better state, and the actual state that we experience it in. And this is our empiric awareness. I am aware of the kind of qualitative nature of pictures and the sounds, the smells, the taste, and so on that I experience. The brain has got digital electrical activity, but qualia, the qualities of our perceptions, are very different. But there is a very close correlation. And I try to give that example that it's like the brain is describing the scene in maybe numbers or words. However, the mind is taking that data, correlating it with an imagery. And we could have gone into other aspects that the brain actually doesn't even have the quantity of data that can account for the richness of our conscious experience. When I look out at the world, I see a very detailed picture of the world. And the brain doesn't have that much data in its in floating around inside it. Somehow or other, the mind is making a better attempt at giving us a veridical impression of the world than the brain is capable of. But that's why there is correlation. But you cannot say that they are the same, because the information format for both our conscious experience and the information that's there in the brain are of two very different formats, and one has to be interpreted into the other.
Yeah, I heard in your Emma Paradigm series, you talked about how the visual processor gets down to about 20 bytes of information when it processes images.
It's, yeah, about 20 pixels or something, you know, that's about all you've got in terms of the visual picture.
Okay.
Not a lot.
What's the next? Okay. On Akhandadi's view, why would we have evolved a brain and sense organs?
It's not a question of why we evolved. We certainly want to use it. It's the same reason that you've got a computer in front of you, and you've probably got it attached to a camera and a microphone. So you've chosen to adopt a device that has sensors and can process that those sensors and receive information from distance, you know, via the internet, and feed it to you on the screen of your device. So that was your choice. That's something you wanted because it gives you an opportunity to act in a particular way. And in the same way, it seems consciousness has adopted the opportunity of biological systems, a form of organism that has sense organs, that has neural kind of processing, and at the same time also has mental or cognitive functions that can translate the information that the senses and the brain are processing into something that is comprehensible to you. In the same way as your computer has data in it that it's gathered from the internet or from the cameras or whatever, but that the data within the CPU is of no use to you, really. Not until that data is reformatted as the picture on your screen or the sounds coming out of your speakers. So similarly, the data that the brain has gathered from the senses is of no use to consciousness until it is reformatted, you know, through the mind, available for our conscious experience. So we like to kind of interact. Consciousness wants to interact in this world, and the way to do it is to get yourself a good machine, you know, a good body with good brain. But there's lots of on offer, because it's not just humans. You can have all different types of sense organs, but some of them are much more fascinating and interesting than what we can do.
Okay, next one. An Edgar Adrian's mechanoreceptor experiments with constant physical input perception decreases perfectly over time with neural firing. Why does this happen on his view?
Yeah, and that is, it's a very natural process, and it's the way the mind works algorithmically. The mind, the best way to think about the mind is a certain AI kind of algorithm. And if something comes up on the screen suddenly now, sorry, I tried to raise my hand, you know, your mind goes to that. And it's new, it's novel. Pay attention to it, and then when it happens again, where's my hand? Still getting my hand in the picture. Then not so interesting next time. The mind is paying less and less attention each time it happens, because it's no longer as relevant to you as the conscious entity. So I'm using these kind of categories of brain activity, mind, and consciousness to show that these are distinct functions. Now, I think David and maybe other physicalists get wrapped up on what is the substance of all of this, but that's irrelevant, because in one sense, we don't understand the substance of matter. Every time we look at it, all we can define it just seems to be energy, information. We can see its properties, we can see its behavior, but we don't know what it is. So similarly, we know that mind has its own properties and functions, and consciousness has its specific functions and properties.
Right, that seems to be the last of the questions, unless there's any that someone wants to throw in right now. But otherwise, I guess we could wrap it up there. Do you want to try to steel man David Papineau's position?
I don't think it's fair to critique.
Yeah.
I think that there are things that we obviously disagree on. I feel that he's taking and he's probably one of the best at articulating the kind of physicalist point of view. He's relying very much on his argument that since mental states interact with the physical, therefore mental states must be physical, because only the physical changes the physical. And I think that's an assumption that cannot be justified. It is not fair to say that modern science absolutely corroborates that. It doesn't. And in fact, I think there are many, many examples that we could have been discussing where it really raises the question that mental states and consciousness do seem to have an impact on the physical quite happily. I tried to give some rationale to that by helping us understand that an interaction happens at substrate levels. So you have to understand what is the nature of the substrate of matter, mind, and also of consciousness. And that's why the Vedanta approach doesn't dismiss science. I'm not trying to dismiss science in any way, but science is a third-party process that is looking at physical stuff and saying, well, we can analyze it. But when it does that, it cannot find anything to do with mind or consciousness. That's its problem. But we know mind and consciousness exist. They're the one things we can be sure of, because consciousness is the most empirical process. We're only aware of the external world through the third-party objective scientific methodology because consciousness is active using that methodology. Similarly, consciousness can reflect on its mental states. You can actually look at your mind and think about the different thoughts and decisions that you're making and how that flow works. And you can guide and change it. So there is interaction between consciousness and mind. And similarly, we can actually try to illuminate the nature of our own consciousness by consciousness itself. That becomes a first-person type of process. And what I would be suggesting is, if we want to understand these three kind of categories of functions, we can come at them from both sides. Let science do its work. Let the processes involving first-person subjective science through consciousness illuminate consciousness and mind. And actually, we will see that there is a real meeting there. I do not see that the Vedanta approach is inconsistent with science, as David was saying. Rather, I think it's highly consistent.
Right. I was reading David Papineau's book on, was it Thinking About Consciousness? And one of his main arguments in there is over-determination. My problem with that argument is I don't think there is a problem of, physicalism doesn't give complete determination. There's nothing like in neuroscience a complete account of human behavior. There's a hypothesis that in the future we might have a complete account with neuroscience that can fully predict the behavior of humans, but we have nothing like that. So in the absence of having that, why not think that the the second element of consciousness being separate from matter, why can't this play the role of determining the things which physics doesn't determine? So physics is deterministic within certain limits, and then conscious entities can make choices within those limits.
Yes, I think you're right there. That and what we were trying to discuss is that you can set up an analysis of a chain of physical events, and where does that get you back to? And can at some point a mental state, i.e. a thought, a desire, an aspiration, an intention, can that set off a physical event? That's his difficulty. And what we didn't discuss was the work of Stuart Hameroff in what's called orchestrated reduction. And what he showed is that the brain activities are not deterministic, because neurons pass on, a charge builds up in a neuron, it fires and sets off another neuron. Okay. The interesting thing is that the threshold at which each neuron fires is not fixed for that neuron. It's variable for that neuron. And what seems to vary it is being influenced by the quantum states within the microtubules. So we can't say for certain that this is what's happening, but it's certainly giving a route by which mental states, mental intention, could directly influence the firing of our neurons. So, and that would not be over determinism, because it's initiating a new line of physical cause and effect. And it would not be contravening causal closure, because it's shown that you can actually initiate new lines. And it doesn't contravene conservation of energy, because the energy flow within the brain is consistent. It's just that the information change is changing how that energy is being used. So I personally find the Vedanta model that we are proposing actually to be highly consistent with all the laws of physics. It's just that the laws of physics, as you said, are not complete in themselves, and that actually we cannot explain the world without understanding that it is a mixture of both physical cause and effect and, conscious entities interacting with it and, interrupting the way or affecting the way that the physicality of the world plays out.
Yeah, on that point of the conservation of energy, I did a post in the Reason and Religion Facebook group, which has a lot of philosophers in there, and nobody really gave me a counter argument about how is it that if in the brain there's that with the microtubules, they it's been found that they vary their resistance according to quantum processes. So when they vary their resistance, this changes the amount of action potential it takes to cause them to fire. So basically a quantum process can determine whether a neuron fires or not. And quantum processes are probabilistic, which means they're not deterministic. So if a conscious entity is able to, with its intention, cause the resistance to increase or decrease, which affects whether a neuron fires or doesn't fire, I don't see why we should expect any energy to be introduced to the system. Because a probabilistic process going one way or another way is not any. You wouldn't measure any difference in energy in the system with it going one way or another.
That's right. No one considers that the change of a quantum state is a conservation. Is energy gained or lost in that respect.
All right. I guess sorry.
The conservation of energy is meant. It's a great way of looking at the bigger picture in the macro world.
All right, I guess we can wrap it up there. It's a shame Papineau couldn't hang around longer, but hopefully we can get him back on another time. And I look forward to having you on again sometime. Thanks for the discussion and whatnot.
Well, thank you very much, Arjun. Really enjoyed it, and thanks for setting up the discussion.
Yeah, so if you like content like this, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. You can help us with the algorithm so that more people get to see our content, and let us know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. Hare Krishna.
And please give a link to Atma Paradigm.
Oh, yeah. I probably already did. I think, yeah, there's a link down there for Atma Paradigm. So if you want to hear more of Akhandadi's, arguments and philosophy and whatnot, then be sure to click on that link and go check out Atma Paradigm. There's like 40 lectures on there. They're very well researched. And yeah, go and subscribe and like his videos. He's got comments turned off, so you can't comment, unfortunately. And we'll leave it there.